Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we have another special episode coming up in the middle of the week, and we will be focusing on how talent is developed within the UK and the USA. For the first part, I am joined by the organizer of the Clanfield Cyclocross, Simon Pattinson. He is also involved in developing talent at a local level in the UK. And for the second part of the podcast, I'm joined by Jesse Anthony, who is the head of cyclocross in the USA, and he will be telling us something about the brand new Olympic Development Academy in the USA. But as said, for the first part, I'm joined by Simon. Simon, welcome on our podcast.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Could you shortly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Simon Pattinson. I live on the south coast of the UK. I'm involved with cycling at a volunteer level and also as a sponsor. We have a business and we sponsor a cyclocross team in the UK as well. So youth cycling, sponsoring, and now running a UCI event in the UK as well.
Yeah, that UCI event is a new one on the calendar, the Clanfield Cyclocross race. Could you tell us a bit about that race?
Yeah, it came about. We during the COVID lockdown last year and the year before, we had access to a meadow in the UK, and due to some restrictions, we allowed a youth cycling club to continue using it during the lockdown period, which meant they could continue riding, and it was great. Out of that, we piloted a league event last year. The UK split up into lots of leagues. And we ran one of the bigger ones is the Wessex League in the south of England here. And we ran a pilot event last year with about, 350 or 400 entries maybe on the day. It went really well. And then the club had some ambitions to run a bigger event. And we decided to try our luck running an independent UCI event, not one part of our national trophy series. So we can come to that in a second if you like. But and that's how it came about really. And we wanted to run it, and we had lots of volunteers willing to get stuck in and design the course and build the course. And yeah, it's we're 3 weeks away and very nervous.
We've seen some pictures on social media of the course. It looks really great in my opinion. It looks beautiful. What type of course is it? Is it flat? Does it have some elevation?
The overriding feature of it is that it's very compact. So the space we're running it in is not big, but we have a lot of elevation. So the lap is about 2,500 meters, 2.5 kilometers. And in that lap, we've got over 60 meters of elevation. So a lot. I think that's probably more than Namur. I think Namur is about 50 meters of elevation per lap. So it's a lot of climbing, a lot of fast descending, and quite a lot of features. So it's an exciting course, good for spectators, really good for spectators actually. You can see the whole course from several points on the venue. And the really interesting feature is in the South Downs, we're on a chalk-based sub-base here. So the ground doesn't really get very muddy, but it does get very slippery. So the surface has got a clay chalk mix in it, and it makes for some really exciting racing. I'm very excited.
Sounds like almost an old-style Swiss cross race with a lot of elevation and the slippery top layer. Should make for some good racing. How are the entries doing for the race?
Yeah, so we have the UCI race on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday we have another league race. And we're 2 weeks before entries close with another week to compile all the information. We're at about 400 entries at the moment with 2 weeks to go. I think we'll get close to 500 entries for the whole weekend. On the UCI race, the junior men's and the men's race has built really nicely, and we're achieving what we hoped to achieve. We've got people coming over for a double weekend, so they can race a UCI race here on the Saturday, and then they can travel up back towards the tunnel, and they can do another one, part of our National Trophy Series on the Sunday. And that has attracted people like Cameron Mason back to race. And we've got a couple of German riders. So that's building nicely. The race that we're struggling for is the junior women's race. We're trying to really push that hard because it's such a crucial race for the development of women's racing, and so we're trying to get more entries into that event at the moment. But overall, looking really promising, and yeah, a good entry.
It's very good that there are now junior women races. This new category is indeed, as you said, crucial to the development of talent. And it's not new that races struggle in terms of that. I mean, we've seen Giete, super prestige race, had a juniors woman race, also not a massive start field. We've seen these races now added in the USA as well in their
Yeah.
races, and also there they struggle as well. Sometimes not even 10 participants, so that's a shame to see. But I don't really, I think I don't know. I don't actually know how come this is a struggle, because at least here in the Netherlands there's plenty of girls who cycle, but perhaps the bigger issue is like in general with the cyclocross, that it's hard for foreign races to attract starters because they all focus on racing in Belgium and the Netherlands.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Geaton was a good example, wasn't it? I think they had about 35. We were there and we had some junior girls racing. I think they had maybe 35 starters, something like that. At our national trophy rounds, we're getting between 25 and 35 starters in that race, all British girls. But what we are seeing in the UK is that I think we've had the under 14, under 16 level, we've got more than I've ever seen before. At the first round of the national trophy in the 16 girls, the under 16 girls, we had 75 starters, which was a number I've never seen before. And it was amazing to see that. So I think organisers are under obligation, a moral obligation, to hold junior girls races, even if they only get 8, 10, 12, 15 entries. And the numbers will come. I think if you keep the events going, the numbers will begin to come through from those under 14, under 16 categories. It's about a lifetime in the sport, really, isn't it? And I think that's how you develop it over time. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good to see that these races are organized. I think it's better than what I saw in Coxide, where they decided to organize newcomer races for men, junior races for men, under 23 race for men, then a women's elite World Cup and a men elite World Cup. It doesn't really benefit the development of women's talent, but in general, for the race itself, I mean, the goal is obviously to, as you said, grow the starting numbers, but is there also ambition to become like part of a national series at some point?
That's an interesting question. I think for our race, we were asked whether we wanted to become part of the national series this year. And we decided for some important reasons that we didn't want to do that. I think probably the ultimate ambition for us would be to have a small series of independent UCI races in the UK that run in coordination with one another, maybe on a cumulative time basis or something that links the series together. But to try and do that so riders could come and do a double weekend at every one of those. So they could come over from the Netherlands, from Belgium, France, and they could race a Saturday and a Sunday in a C2 race. And therefore we can start to attract that slightly second division rider, maybe the pro rider who, isn't going to the World Cups or whatever, because they want to come and get points and get prize money. But it also helps then the British scene, particularly, we have a very strong under 23 men's scene, but it would help. It would help here as well. So I think that ultimately would be our ambition. Whether we can get British cycling to come on that journey with us, I don't know. I mean, a lot will depend on the success of this weekend. I think it's an important test event.
I think that tackles one of the most important issues that we currently have with the calendar. There is not enough coordination, which you are aiming for, between races. Like, for instance, if we look at the World Cup calendar, you have a race on Belgium on Sunday or on Saturday, and then a World Cup far away on Sunday, and then riders look, what's the problem? Why do we need to travel so far? Was like, in a way like this, if at some point there would be a World Cup race on Sunday in the UK, then if you have a race on Saturday, it would make travel much more sustainable, and give an impulse to like cycling in the region as well, because they can see the best riders race twice.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think the coordination on the calendar, not only in the UK, but across Europe and in fact across the world, is pretty poor, if not non-existent. And you've seen as well in Belgium, you've seen some really great races have to cancel because of clashes with, Zilvermere Cross was a good example, wasn't it? I mean, races being cancelled because of clashes with World Cups. And it just seems so unnecessary. But you do need a governing body to go on that journey with you, and I think see opportunities outside of their own. In the UK, we have this British cycling series, this national series, and there is nothing outside of that at all at a sort of a UCI level, a higher level. I'm hoping that we can. Stage one for us is to test the event, make sure we can put on a good event with the course that riders leave. The ones who come, they leave and they tell people it was a great course, it was worth the journey, it was a good fun event, and we got some good racing. And we're happy to try and build that over a couple of years, and hopefully we can get other events to come on board with us and maybe run a little. I mean, I really like the cumulative time series where you're encouraged to do all of the events and build your result over them. That has quite a lot of appeal. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
And do you think in general that organizing races outside of Belgium is too hard, and that is also the way, or at least it's too hard to attract the big names, and that is also what it makes it complicated for foreign races to start at a lower level and then eventually develop towards World Cup status?
Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, there is, whereas you've got, I mean, certainly in Belgium and to some extent in the Netherlands, you've got a business model really that works with these big races, haven't you? I mean, there is a thing, there's TV rights, there's lots of sponsors, VIP, entertaining, all sorts of things which generate income. In the UK, we just don't have anything. We don't have anything at all. So even if you run the events on a shoestring, on a very small limited budget, it's very hard even to break even. And that's when you're charging riders to enter the race. So I think the first thing to do is to try and get some sort of business model that actually works, which means the races become, you can use bigger venues, you can be more sophisticated with your race setup, you can attract the bigger riders. I mean, I don't necessarily mean pay start money, but you can attract bigger riders. I don't know. For me, it's a little bit like running a business. You've got to try and test this model. If it works in principle and you think you can build on something, then have a little bit of a sustained approach, run it for a few years and just improve every year and see if you can get something going with momentum. I think everything's about momentum in the end.
And do you think that momentum is picking up and that we will eventually see a World Cup in the UK?
Yeah, I think so. I think we will. I mean, I know a lot of the organisers, or speak to a lot of the organisers of the national trophies. I think we lack venues to some extent. I mean, we don't lack venues, but we lack venues that have been properly investigated and explored to run good courses. There's a little bit of a tendency in the UK to run events based around parking rather than the quality of the event. And I'm always amazed how relaxed the approach is in the Netherlands and in the Belgium to, number one is putting the course on and getting spectators in, and number two seems to be parking, and parking will happen anywhere people can find a space, which is great if you've got the community on board and you've got some sort of social support for that. And again, I think in the UK, we need to build that, because we have venues where if you park in a residential street, people come out very irate because you've blocked in, there's just not that support behind events at the moment. And I think, for example, where we are we're in a small village in the South Downs, and we've put quite a lot of effort in this event in building local support and understanding that we haven't got great parking, there will be a lot of street parking, and can they just come along and watch the event and try and get involved with it, and an engagement at that level. And it sounds like a really silly thing, but the other thing in the UK is that it's based around parking at these big events, because we, as you probably know, we have to take to our events petrol jet washers and hundreds of litres of water, because the events never supply bike cleaning equipment. So therefore, it sounds really silly, but you have to be parked fairly close, because if you've got to pull 100 kilos of water up a hill, it's quite a big logistical effort. So at this event, we've got Karcher on board, and we are supplying a proper pits with washers and water and everything else. So people can be a little bit more relaxed about where they park.
And if we would eventually have a venue, with possibly parking as well, or just a venue in the first place, and an organizer that can organize a World Cup in terms of budget and wants to do that. What do you think that would mean for cyclocross in the UK?
Yeah, I think it would be really significant, especially if the lead-in time was a year or two. We've got really good talent in the UK. We've got I think in the men's scene, we've got some really good under 23 riders. Junior women's scene, we've got great riders. Maybe with one or two obvious exceptions, we lack it in other places. In the UK particularly, the appetite for cyclocross is massive. I mean, we've got massive leagues, which on a Sunday league race can easily get 400, 500 riders turn up. Vast numbers of those are very young, but there is a great momentum behind that in the UK, and I think it just needs better exposure to better racing. So a World Cup for the UK, I think, would be important, but I think it would be important with a little series around it as well. So get a little bit more away from the National Trophy Series. And then, like our team does, it encourages riders then to make those journeys over to Belgium and to the Netherlands to race for weekends. Because to be honest, we can go to, I mean, next weekend, we're doing a day trip with our team to Kortrijk. And it's quicker for us to get to Kortrijk and race than it is to the National Trophy in the Northeast where we went yesterday.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. And I mean, not every country is as tiny as the Netherlands or Belgium, where if you're in Belgium, it doesn't really matter where you live. Within 2.5 hours, you've reached all races. I mean, Van Aert added Val di Sol to his program, but without Val di Sol, the furthest he needed to ride to get to a race was 1 hour and 45 minutes to be at 11 top class races in Belgium and then one in the Netherlands. So it's very hard to compete, and that's like what we've heard with when we spoke with other people as well. It's very hard because in Belgium, starting at a young age, you can go to races at a high level every weekend, super close to yourself. In other countries, that's more difficult. However, I do wonder, like as you said, there's a lot of talent coming through. I mean, of course, Tom Pidcock is the standout name, but if you look at the youth categories, of course, you have Cameron Mason. Thomas Main has also been solid this year, a bit less following some crashes on the road, but still very talented. If you look, there's some very strong first years under 23 who got on the top 10 on the Koppenberg Cross. If we look in the juniors men category, we can also see talent coming through there. Nathan Smith got second in the World Cup in Tabor. Oliver Akers also a top 10 at the European Championships. Some other talent there as well. And in the junior women's category, I mean, also there, Zoe Buckset is the standout name. But below that, there's a good following. Also top 10 at the European Championships. Very good to see. Do you think that this is also triggering like interest from companies to start sponsoring? Because in the Netherlands we have a super strong women's category, but the interest from companies to step in and sponsor hasn't raised at all following this absolute dominance.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised. Well, I mean, I can speak with a different hat on, really, as the owner of a business which sponsors a team. We're not a UCI team, but we're a team that focuses on junior and under 23 development in the UK. It is very hard to get cash out of businesses to sponsor any sport at the moment in the UK. I think, to be honest, I don't think there is. I don't think that talent is now. It's too diluted. I don't think cyclocross in particular has the exposure in the UK that would give those sponsors, certainly sponsors out of the cycling world, enough payback to warrant that investment. It's too diluted. I mean, if you look at any of those names you mentioned, they're all in different teams. I think the potential would be if you could get if you like, an Ineos equivalent in cyclocross, a British sponsored cyclocross team, which could harvest most of those big names into it for the cross season. I think you'd have potential there. But if you read a newspaper in the UK and they have a cycling column, they don't really mean cycling. They really mean road cycling. They don't even cover Evie Richards winning the World Championships on a mountain bike. they wouldn't cover Tom winning a World Cup. Nothing would be covered. It gets virtually no exposure at all. So I think the other potential is that when we run events, we get a little series going, or with the National Trophy Series, or certainly a World Cup. If we get TV coverage, then I think it's a game changer. I think if you can get some exposure on television on the BBC or possibly another terrestrial channel in the UK, then I think the game would change very significantly.
I think even with just an online broadcast to begin with, I mean, in France, they have their own national series as well, Coupe de France, and they've been able to provide one day of broadcasting, and all their weekends are double weekends. And ever since that started, we've seen more French UCI teams come in, and they don't even all have one or two top tier riders. They just have a lot of riders riding in the midfield, but they get the exposure, and that apparently gets enough companies on so they can start their UCI team. Because if you look at the list of UCI teams, I think we're around 10 French UCI teams, and that's really a lot.
Yeah. I didn't know that, and that's really interesting you tell me that. And in fact, having told me that, I'll make contact with them and see how they built that model. Because you are absolutely right that just getting some coverage, even online, would be perfect. I mean, we have GCN in the UK, obviously, which does very well, and broadcasts, obviously buys the rights to broadcast most of the bigger races, but all the series and everything else. So I think there'd be an appetite from, I don't know, I've never spoken to them, but I think there'd be an appetite from them to use any coverage you could provide of races. But it's about that business model at the moment of being able to afford to do that, because the events just don't have that level of backing. The event we've got going here, if you don't mind me, one question. You asked me earlier on why we decided, were we going to become part of the national series? And one of the reasons we decided not to do that was that we'd actually had quite a lot of early success with some sponsors for the event. And particularly with a Vitus, who are a bike brand in the UK, which are owned by Wiggle, who are an online bike brand around Europe, but very big in the UK. And they're very local to us. They're based on the South Coast. And Vitus sponsor a cyclocross team in the UK as well. And they were very, very quickly on board with this event. And I think really genuinely see it as a way to expose their bikes to a very big market in the UK. And I think if we could build on that trust with them over a couple of years and bring on other sponsors, then potentially even next year we would have the funds to be able to afford a production company to do some footage of the racing. And then maybe we could get some exposure. And I think that's what I mean by momentum. I think you need a little bit of year-on-year momentum behind it to develop what is effectively a business model, isn't it? There's no other way to look at it.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think GCN would be interested, because we saw this year in the USA they have their series there as well, the US CX series, and they managed. I mean, I know it was a struggle. It was such a struggle that they didn't have any money remaining to have like a prize money over the entire series, but the series itself got broadcasted on GCN. Double weekends, both in the USA on the same venue, but like they turned things around. But I did see the results pay off there, and it is indeed all about momentum, and it's complicated. Broadcasts cost a lot of money. They made it work, so good for them, and I hope to see that here in the future as well. One final thing that could help here was, I mean, we've seen Ineos, they have now Tom Pidcock. They let Pidcock do cyclocross, they let him do mountain bike. They also signed Ben Turner, and he's also doing cyclocross. I mean, in the beginning he's still riding for Trinity, but from the 1st of January he'll be riding for Ineos as well. He also gives the freedom, so perhaps it would be interesting to see if Ineos can somewhat have a small cyclocross team besides their road team as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think that would be a really good move, wouldn't it? Weirdly, as a complete aside, I mean, I think there's a growing understanding that riders, ride cross in the winter, and the big road teams can allow them to do that. But again, that's quite slow in the UK. It's not really, British cycling. There are people at British Cycling who really get off-road racing and the benefits of it and really promote it and push it hard. But honestly, as a general performance program, it's not well thought of. And even in the talent development at the youth levels, I mean, they're almost discouraged from doing it. I mean, we're so focused on track medals in the UK, to be honest, at a performance level, that it's depressing. It's really depressing, and I have quite a big problem with the way they push that. We've got a rider on our team who I won't mention, because who was on a youth performance pathway and was sort of fairly unceremoniously dropped from it, but has flourished so much since she came off the program. Because she's got the freedom to do stuff, and particularly cross, which she really enjoys, and has been racing a few World Cups, and doing really well in the junior category, girls category. So I think British cycling are not blameless in this sort of slight problem we have in the UK, where cyclocross is really the best kept secret in cycling, and doesn't get wide publicity. But yeah, we are where we are. We need to try and break that cycle.
I think that has to do with it not being Olympic. I mean, if we look, where do the cycling federations get their money from? Most of it comes from the Olympic Committee. And where do they award the money? Where they think they have the most chances of getting medals. So it's really a shame. I personally think that it would be a major step for cyclocross, especially in terms of internationalization, if the IOC allows the sport to become Olympic. I know the lobbying for that is tough, but there's a lot of hard work being done. The CEO of Flanders Classics hopes to get cyclocross on the Olympic program in 4 years' time, so in 2026, when we're going to Italy.
Yeah.
We will hear news about that, I think, in February next year, if that's happening. But I personally think that would be a major step, because then there would be more funding awarded, and then you will also see that the athletes, they rise in terms of their reputation. And then why do companies sponsor? Because they get exposure. And what gets exposures? The people with these high reputations and that attract fans.
Yeah, I agree with you almost entirely. And I don't know how the model in Belgium or the Netherlands works. I expect in the Netherlands that would work well. In the UK, my only concern would be that, again, it comes back to the way British cycling run their talent pathways. But I'm not a fan of these pathway programs that really have a very steep-sided pyramid. So they have a very big base, and then they gradually filter people out at what they call talent identification, which isn't really. It's just picking the big kids who are young. And they're not very good at it, but they end up with lots of medals, but very few athletes. And in the UK, we have the third most obese nation in Europe. We have the lowest number of 18-year-olds taking part in sport in the whole of the Western world, yet we're very good at winning medals. And for me, that is not a disconnect. There's a great correlation between that. So British cycling are great at producing medals, but they're not great at keeping people in the sport for life. And that's one of my biggest issues, that I think, why are we trying to identify talent so young? What we should be doing is trying to build a massive pool of athletes who enjoy the sport, and out of that will come the Tom Pidcotts, the Evie Richards, the Anna Kays, the whatever you like. But you don't need to have a massive program which just drops them at the first sign of weakness. So I agree with what you're saying now, but I'm concerned that as soon as money and Olympic medals start to flooding, that what we have in the UK that works really well, which is the grassroots, the weekly Sunday leagues, which are fantastically popular, that will get completely mucked up, because British cycling will start to pay interest. And that in itself will cause problems. That's my only concern.
I can only speak for what I know about the Netherlands, and part of it is from my own experience as being a former junior rider. You have a national selection here as well, and that has the same problem. If you don't perform enough, you're dropped by it. But here in the Netherlands, we're kind of lucky. You have this cushion to catch if you are dropped, to catch your fall if you're dropped by that team, or the national selection, I mean. And this is like, every region has like its own regional development talent, and that's like a bigger team, which is the bigger pool of athletes you're talking about. But the people in charge of this, they kind of scout their regions, and they keep track of who is here, and also in terms of progression, and there's open training where everyone is free to join. At least that was the case in my region. Lars van der Haar gave one of them a couple of years ago. So in a way, it's a bit better organized here, but yeah, I can understand that it's definitely not the case everywhere. And I mean, in the Netherlands, it's also lucky, like everything is relatively close, and in terms of youth races or local races, they are still here as well. Every weekend you have one, or most of the times even two races, and I mean, you still can ride for club teams, and that's even the case if you're a newcomer or junior. The national talent team only starts when you're junior as well. Like when you're second year under 20, second year newcomer, that's when they will contact you most of the time. They might look at you earlier, but it only really starts when you're junior. They only start developing you when you're junior, and even if you're dropped there, you can ride for like a local team. And that's the thing, if lucky if you're in the Netherlands, I mean, you can still go to these local races in the Netherlands, or even to a top class race in Belgium like XVO Super Prestige. You might not go to the World Cup because you're not part anymore, but you can still participate in the top class races. And it's interesting that we're talking about this now, because in the second part of the podcast we're speaking with Jesse Anthony. I already recorded an interview with him, and he is talking with us about the talent development program in the USA. So it will be interesting to see what he has to say on this topic.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to hear what he says. So in the Netherlands, is that right? There is no talent identification until junior.
From the best of my recollection, at least that's how I experienced it. It's like on a regional level, there might already be things like a regional team, which takes you to like a road race or stuff. But that's not really a selection or development. It only really starts when you're junior. And I mean, in terms of results, yes, they look at your results as a newcomer, but they only really start talking to you when you are a junior. And that also involves developing you towards under 23. That only starts when you're a junior. And to add to that, these local races, they are also always monitored by people from the region. And that goes for national and regional races. They are monitored, and if you progress and start performing in there, the regional team, it's not really a coach, but he's also not really a scout. I don't really know what I would call him in English, but he will then put your name forward if you do good enough. He will contact you, and then he can put your name forward to become part of the regional or even the national team.
That on the face of it, that sounds more progressive than the slightly the much earlier model we have in the UK, which I have a big issue with. And it's difficult to work that out. But yeah, there we are where we are. But I have to say, there are people in the UK in British cycling who are extremely passionate about cyclocross and its place in the building of both talent and a larger pool of lifetime athletes. And that's what we all want in the end, really.
Yeah, I personally agree that around the juniors categories, like before that, I think it's pretty irrelevant to look at. I mean, even in the juniors category, like you're talking about children who some might have already grown a lot, others are still growing and need to mature. So I think only like after the under 23 category you have a clear picture, and even then some riders flourish at their 25th, others flourish at their 23rd, others flourish when they're 33. Or look at Heinrich Hausler, he flourishes in cyclocross when he's 38. I mean,
yes, I know. I'm glad to hear. I'm really, really pleased to hear you say that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people trying to make, they're trying to produce medals, but they're also trying to build their own coaching reputations. And they think they can, and certainly in the UK, we have an extraordinary number of so-called professional coaches who are really trying to make their pretty inferior business models work. And they do that often by trying to pick up, pretty young, but pretty big kids, let's call them the big young kids, who are very good because their developmental age is well ahead of others' chronological age, and it makes them faster. And you're right, it's not until junior under 23 when those differences really do start to level out.
Well, then I think we've had it. I think it was a pretty interesting conversation. Simon, thank you for wanting to talk about your race and British talent in general.
Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure.
We once again thank Simon for his time and talking about his race, the Clanfield Cyclocross. If you're a rider and listening to this and still doubting whether you should register or not, well, certainly get registered. Now we will talk with our second guest, Jesse Anthony. He is the director of Cyclocross for USA Cycling. Jesse, welcome on our show.
Thanks, Noah. Good to be here.
Could you maybe introduce yourself shortly to our listeners?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm the cyclocross director at USA Cycling. So I manage our national team program for cyclocross racing and also work in the development space in cyclocross as well.
And we're mainly focusing today on the new Cyclocross Academy that's been started this year in the USA. Could you tell us a bit about that program or project?
Yeah, so this year in 2021, USA Cycling launched the Olympic Development Academy, which is a development program for all cycling disciplines. So we have for all five, for BMX, track, road, mountain bike, and cyclocross for junior and U23 athletes.
Well, I think in a way it's very good to hear that there is a more centralized approach. At least that's what I heard from it. Here over in Europe, we've seen some pretty criticizing articles come out in the news that the USA was doing nothing to develop the talent in cyclocross. I already knew that that was not the case before, but in a way, I guess it's interesting to hear that from you what is actually happening within that program, because it started this year. I heard you went to some races with a group of children or talents. Could you tell us what you've been doing so far this year?
Yeah, so that's a good point you bring up. In the past, we've had very, I would not, it's limited, development opportunities for cyclocross riders. A few years ago, USA Cycling adopted the Mud Fund, which is a special fundraising branch that's part of our foundation. Now we have a USA Cycling Foundation that raises money for all of our athletics programs. And the Mud Fund, it raises money specifically for cyclocross. So that has given more resources into developing cyclocross and cyclocross athletes. So that was really big. That came into USA Cycling in 2018, and that just allowed us to really establish a more structured and more strategic cyclocross development program into our national team program, and helped us support a national team program a little better. That program went really well in 2019 into 2020, which was the first full year of that program supported by the additional funding. And then, of course, we had the COVID year in 2020. So that kind of changed, the landscape of what we were able to do quite a bit. Now, at this point in 2021, 2022, we are kind of restarting our development efforts in all disciplines, especially in cyclocross. And part of that restart was, like I mentioned, this Olympic Development Academy, which, like I said, was offered to multiple disciplines. So the cyclocross discipline, or the Cyclocross Academy, is we have 10 riders, six junior riders and 4 U23s in that program. And yeah, we brought them to a lot of the high level UCI races in the US. So we're doing 5 total race weekends this year, along with the training camp that we did in August. And so those riders kind of get opportunities with us. We also offer, coaching, high level support for the races, and then kind of holistic athlete development, where we offer access to sports psychology, to nutrition coaching, strength and conditioning, and all of these things that, fit into an athlete's development and their, like them moving toward the professional ranks.
And of those 5 race weekends, are those solely in the United States, or is there also plans to make the trip over to Europe after or around the Christmas period, as we usually see American riders do?
Yeah, so this year the Cyclocross Academy is operating only in the US with those 5 weekends. In the future, I believe the Academy program will go to Europe for some races. So I'm operating both the Academy program and our national team program this year. Our national team program we haven't done anything with that yet, but at Christmas time, we will bring over our national team riders. So we'll have, a bunch. I think we have 12 or 13 riders going over for the Christmas period.
It's always good to see them back, especially after last season. There were only a handful of riders that could race in Europe due to the pandemic. Of course, we saw no American under 23 or juniors, no junior racing at all, actually. So good to see that development is picked up again. But I can imagine that it's difficult. In Belgium and the Netherlands, it's both small countries, and races are always near the places where people live. The United States is a much bigger country. Could you tell us a bit about those differences?
Basically, the development pathway for any discipline, especially cyclocross in the U.S., is very challenging because the athletes all live so far apart. Because the United States is obviously a very big country, so in order for them to get together and race against each other or train with each other, they have to travel a long way. So that doesn't happen very often. And then the traveling during the season is very taxing on the riders. It takes a lot of energy to, sometimes it's 9 or 10 hour travel days from one coast to the other. So that just adds up throughout the season when they're doing that every weekend or multiple weekends a month. So that's definitely a big challenge that we face. When we go to Europe and are able to race in Belgium and Netherlands, that's obviously very accessible racing there. Once you get over there, of course, it's a challenge for us to it's a big travel. It's expensive. The time zone is much different than obviously we're in foreign countries. So when people like Clara Hunsinger are able to make that trip over to Europe and stay there for a long period of time, she can really settle into the European racing and get used to the races. She stays in Sittard at Watersley, where we have the USA Cycling House, and she also rents a house with her team, Cannondale Cyclocross World. So there are ways for riders to get over to Europe and compete there. And again, they can find a location that makes it very accessible and easy to manage that season. And I think that's very productive. But in order to make that jump, financially, it's very challenging. They obviously have to have sponsors and support that is able to support their travel to Europe and paying them to race. And then also just the challenge of, leaving your home for so long.
Obviously, the finances are an important part of the sport. It's very expensive for Americans to race in the United States, but it's also even more expensive, I think, to come to Europe because you need to ship all your bikes and trainers and stuff and then stay here for a long amount of time. But how do you then feel about European riders who complain about coming to the States for 1 or 2 weeks?
Yeah, I have to laugh at that all the time because the rest of the world, it's not just America, but anyone from Asia, from Australia who wants to race cyclocross has to travel a very long way to go to Europe for the World Cup Series, for the World Championships most of the time. So when the riders complain about that, and a lot of them don't, some of them do, and I think the ones that do complain about it, it's kind of loud in the media and everybody, makes some statements about that. I understand it's what they're used to, that they're used to being able to drive 2 or 3 hours and every once in a while they have to drive down to France or over to Czech Republic to do some racing. But for the most part, they stay home and they do all the best races in the world, right? And they're, 2 or 3 hours away. So when they come here, I think they experience what we have done our entire lives and what we do for whether it's mountain biking or even road cycling and track. So all of the disciplines, those other disciplines are maybe more developed around the world. So there's a mountain bike World Cup in Brazil or in South Africa or somewhere else. Cyclocross has historically just almost always been only in Europe. And as that grows, I think some of the riders are realizing how important it is for the sport to grow globally and to be a much bigger economy by branching out to other countries and other continents. But at the same time, it creates challenges for them, challenges that we've been dealing with, like I said, every year that we race. But yeah, it's something with money makes a lot of problems a lot easier to solve. And money isn't the solution for every problem. But if I had a massive budget and I could pay every rider $100,000 a year, it would be very easy for us to have our most talented riders in Europe all the time. I think if they did not have to worry about the stresses of life and how they're going to pay their rent and all these other things. We could see them stay in the sport, but a lot of them have to leave because they get to the point where they have to decide between, whether they want to make a living or go to school or continue their, lifestyle in the US, or if they are going to really commit to the sport and racing in Europe.
I think this, what you said, really hits the core of the issues of developing talent outside of the Netherlands and Belgium, and your answer is pretty much the same as what we heard from Katie Keogh. We spoke with her earlier this season and she basically said the same, and I tend to agree that in the Netherlands or Belgium, ever since you turn 7 years old, you can start racing cyclocross, and it's always close to your house. It's usually a 1 max 2 hours drive, and from then you can race. And when you eventually turn newcomer or junior, from your house you can, especially if you live in Belgium, you can race an international top race every weekend, sometimes even twice, and in a way that's kind of an unfair advantage. But what would you then say is the goal of the academy? Is it then to eventually have those people over in Europe for a longer of time, or is it to develop a certain amount of riders?
I think it's there's two answers, and I think you've kind of named them both. One is we have to continue our development efforts here in the U.S. because it's important that we have pathways for the athletes here to gain experience and to kind of grow in the sport. Learn more about the racing, race against each other, and kind of get faster and stronger and gain experience in the sport. And then the other part is once they do get to a certain age and to a certain level, that we are able to bring them to Europe and have the opportunities to really go race at the highest levels. Having the World Cups here is a really good incentive for them. They get to see what the sport is like at the highest level. And it's very cool for us to have that in America and have to be a part of this world circuit. And that's why I see how it's so important to globalize the sport, because if you can have a World Cup in Japan or in Australia or something like that will really incentivize and the young riders in that country. Because I think kids, when I was a kid, I was coming up, I looked to mountain bike racing and was able to see the top mountain bike racers and was really a big fan of all that. And if we had a World Cup in Mount Snow, which is not too far from where I grew up in Massachusetts, and that was really cool to be able to see the world champion racing, at a race that you could race at or nearby. So I think there's definitely multiple facets to this growth of the sport and the growth of the riders in the sport as well.
Yeah, I agree that the importance of a World Cup in a country can't be stressed enough. It's important. Peter Blask said it on our podcast when we were talking about the Tabor podcast, Tabor World Cup, that it's so important for the Czech Republic to have a World Cup so that the young riders can see the big stars race, and for the USA that's exactly the same.
Yeah, for sure.
Then on the name, it has the part Olympic in it. Here in Europe, that's raised some eyebrows. There were quite some people kind of thinking, does this mean that cyclocross is going to turn Olympic? But I already heard from you that it has a different meaning.
Yeah, so the Olympic Development Academy is the name for our academy for all our disciplines. And that's something that USA Cycling developed because obviously we're trying to develop Olympic athletes. So we use that for all the disciplines, and cyclocross was obviously part of this development program. So it just dons that name. Also, we think cyclocross historically is a really good, it's a good type of racing, good discipline for development in many different ways, for technical ability, for tactical racing, for many other reasons. Cyclocross is a really just for growing your aerobic engine or anaerobic engine, doing really deep efforts. There's not really any other sports like cyclocross that force our bike handling. You're like focusing on bike handling for the entire race. It's like very skills driven, and then the tactics. Like you could be racing in 28th place, but you're still trying to figure out tactics, how to beat the person next to you, and that's kind of rare. Mountain biking might be the only other sport like that. But in a road race, like it's really good for developing road racers, because road races, you're either in the race or you're not. And if you're out of the group, then you're in 50th place and you get split off from the group. There's no tactics anymore. You just ride to the finish. So cyclocross is a very important discipline, and we had almost 1/3 or close to 1/3 of the athletes that we had on our Olympic long team for Tokyo had cyclocross backgrounds. So while cyclocross itself is not in the Olympics, it plays a very big role in the athlete development space toward the Olympic sports.
Yeah, I would say it's unfortunate that it isn't Olympic because I think that would be an important factor. But in a way, it's already good to see that there's such a well, at least that's how it comes across, a very plan that's very figured out in a way to develop cross talent. But is the goal also to keep these riders in cyclocross then, or is it the goal to combine disciplines, or is it solely to develop them for other disciplines within cycling?
It's a little bit of both. I would love to see more U.S. athletes stay in cyclocross, but we know that's only realistic if they have professional opportunities out of the sport. And one of my kind of missions over the next few years is to develop a pathway for U.S. athletes to race on European teams, and that just hasn't really happened much in the past. Katie Compton obviously raced in Europe for a long time. She had her own sponsors there. Jonathan Page did the same thing. For a little while, he raced for European teams, but he never really got a contract in, one of the bigger teams back when he was racing. So I would love to see some of our athletes get opportunities on, Paulusausen Bingo or, the Trek Balois Lions or one of these teams. So I think having those pathways is really important for these athletes to move forward. We can't just expect them to all come up with their own sponsors and forge their own path. So in that regard, I definitely want to see more athletes stay in cyclocross. At the same time, if we can develop athletes for other sports like cyclocross, like I said, it's an important part of the development ecosystem for other disciplines, and so it serves both of those purposes. And that is not that still shows an importance in cyclocross, and it still warrants a big development effort there. It's not that like, oh, well, if they can't be pros here, we shouldn't do it. Like, absolutely, we should still do cyclocross. And athletes that go into mountain bike or even track, several of our track athletes had raced in cyclocross in the past. And so it's a really important development sport all around.
I think it's also possible to combine the disciplines, as you said. I mean, we saw Blevins do a short trip to the cyclocross. I was pretty impressed by his two races he did. Eventually, he was too tired to do the World Cups, but he started on the last row for both races and he finished on the podium on one of them. And on the other one, he also had a very fast start and then in the top 10. I was impressed, and I think we can also see it with the likes of Yolanda Neff, Evie Richards, that it's perfectly possible to combine mountain biking and cyclocross because there's of course a big overlap between these two disciplines.
Yeah, yeah. No, like I said, it's definitely multifaceted, and it serves a lot of different purposes within the sport.
And then to come back on what you said about the sponsors, I think it's a tough position at the moment. Balois Trek is, in my opinion, the only Belgian team that's really looking into also foreign riders. If I look at Paul Sauze, of course, before it used to be Paul Sauze Vastgoed. I heard that they had interest in Ellen Noble at some point, but eventually now Paul Sauze Bingo is really focused on Belgium. Their priority is on Belgium. If you look at what their riders say, he was pretty positive about the trip to the States, but if we then look, the polar opposite is Laurens Week. He skipped the trip to the States. He prefers the race in Leuven over the World Cup in Tabor. Also pretty negative already about Tabor, that it's too far away. So I guess in a way it's pretty hard at this point, because if we look back to the late 2000s, then we saw still the likes of Peter Dlask and some other riders still riding for Belgian teams, but now it's just been looking very hard, and we see most Americans that are able to come over, at least in recent years, like Clara Honsinger for the Cannondale team. So I think we're still lucky to have such loyal sponsors in the USA.
Yeah, definitely. Cannondale has obviously been a big supporter of the sport and the US riders for a long time. That team has been going for many years, and they've put a lot into it. And you're seeing now, like, we're getting World Cup result podiums out of Clara Honsinger. There's also Katie Klaus coming up in the U23 ranks, supported by Cannondale. So they've done a great job of supporting some of our best athletes. Obviously, Katie Keogh for many years in the past. But you're right that, and look, those teams are businesses, and if they're the business that's sponsoring them only cares about Belgium, then that makes sense for them to only have Belgian riders. Trek Balois Lions, obviously, I think Sven Nys and the organization there have a really more broad vision for the sport and for their team. And obviously Trek is an American company, so they're interested in seeing this sport grow and seeing that team grow, outside of just Belgium and the Netherlands as well. So it comes to whatever the team's, what their business focus is and what they're really trying to get out of it. And hopefully, with cyclocross, with the World Cups growing here, with World Championships here, and if we can grow our sport here, that will make it more appealing for some of those teams for sponsors to be part of those teams that have a global interest and more interest in business in the US. And that would, make it much more reasonable to bring US riders on.
Talking about sponsors, this year the World Championships are held in Fayetteville. Walmart has attached its name to that as title sponsor. Do you hope or think that the Walmart can play a bigger role within the sport of cycling in the future?
Yeah, I would love to see Walmart get involved in cycling. I think we want to, grow this sport and make it more accessible to a lot of people and raise the awareness of it. And I think Walmart has that reach of being all across America and even around the world. And if they want to get more involved in the sport, they can certainly help grow it, bring awareness to different communities that maybe haven't seen either a lot of cyclocross or any cyclocross in their community before.
Yeah, I hope so as well. When I first read the announcement, I thought that it was actually saying that they were becoming the title sponsor of the World Cup for next year. I was immediately thinking, oh, this is great news. But then I read it again, and then I was like, oh, it's only for the World Championships. Still good news about those World Championships. What do you hope that the American cyclocross riders can achieve there?
Oh, well, I want to win. That's why we go to every race to win. It's for many categories, that's very hard for us. We don't have the riders and have not had the pathway to be on the podium level at the international races. But obviously in the elite women's race, Clara has been right there racing with the best and even beating them at the Koppenberg. So I think there's a few categories where we have athletes that are ready to take on that podium challenge, and we'll be working toward that for the next 2 months.
Fingers crossed. I hope we can see. I don't expect anything, but it would be amazing to see at least one American standing on the podium there in the home country.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that.
Well, just to thank you for your time to come on the podcast and talk about this. It was certainly interesting to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's great to have this conversation, and thanks for taking the time to invite me on. And I will be over in Europe at the end of December, so I look forward to seeing everybody over there.
Yeah, we'll definitely meet up. I'll be going to some races in the Christmas period as well. Fingers crossed they go through with spectators though. However, thanks to you for coming on once again, and earlier this podcast we also spoke with Simon. Once again, I thank him for coming on as well. That concludes this episode of the Cyclocross Social podcast. A bit a different one than what we are used to having, but I think nevertheless it was a pretty interesting one. If you have any comments, you can mail them to the email address in the description of the podcast, noah@cyclocross.com, and that has 3 S's at the end. So yeah, we're looking forward to reading your reactions to this podcast. Thank you for listening. This weekend we will be back with more podcasts. We have the XTO Trophy in Kortrijk coming up, and then after that we have the World Cup in Besançon coming up. Thanks everyone for listening, and as said, we'll be back this weekend. Goodbye!